Hey there, welcome back to VR Essentials. This is a series of videos I've put together designed to tell you everything you need to know about virtual reality so you can make an informed decision on whether or not VR is for you. In this part 5 of the 6-part series, we're going to dig into the real nuts and bolts. Once again, a focus on Microsoft Flight Simulator, the HP Reverb G2 headset, and Windows Mixed Reality. A big welcome to the SimHanger. My name's Mark. Thanks for watching and let's get started. In this video, post-install, we're going to have a look at the Windows Mixed Reality settings and what's best for performance. We're also going to look at the OpenXR Development Toolkit for Windows Mixed Reality and again dig into the settings that can help us get a better experience in VR. We'll also take a detailed look at the settings in Microsoft Flight Simulator. What do all those settings mean and which ones should we be conscious of that have a big impact on our performance? And in addition to that, I'll also be giving you some suggested starting points and method for establishing the best performance in virtual reality. If you've missed any of my previous VR Essentials videos, I'll leave a link to those in the notes below. If you're new to VR especially, these are a recommended watch. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more like this. We will take it as read that you have followed the instructions and done the initial install of your VR headset and paired your controllers. You can run this program again anytime by going via the Start menu to the Setup program and completing your setup, which should include room setup. As our focus is on flight simulation, you should choose the seated option. Once the install has been completed, you will see this icon on your desktop. I suggest you pin it to your taskbar and then click and open the application. This will take you directly to the Windows Virtual Reality Microsoft Home. It will now be visible both in your headset and on screen. Let's stay out of the headset for a moment. We've got some settings to do, which are on the right hand side. Clicking on the 3 bars at the top opens up the menu. The room boundary option lets us specify the type of setup that we want. We've already chosen seated, but we could change it here if we wanted to, and if our controllers were connected, they would also be displayed here. If we click the 3 dots on the bottom right, another menu opens. A help option, an option to set up your controllers, and the one we're interested in, settings. Click on settings. You can also access this menu directly from your desktop using the settings icon. Here we may want to change some of the settings to optimize performance. The first category is audio and speech, and that's fairly straightforward. Most VR headsets have their own mic and speakers. The first 2 options select the headset audio and mic. These would be switched to the off position if you wanted to use your own headphones or another default device. The third option mirrors the headset sound to desktop audio. The second option are startup and desktop management. And here you can choose how your headset starts up. And you have options between starts as soon as it's plugged in. The second option, and the one ticked here, is utilizing the presence sensor, so it switches on when you put the headset on. Third option is for Steam users and will automatically start Windows Mixed Reality for Steam VR. My personal choice is to have none of those boxes ticked. I have the Windows Mixed Reality icon pinned to my taskbar and I manually start it before I start the sim. I find that I'm far less prone to crashes or problems if I start Windows Mixed Reality before the sim. I prefer to do this manually. And this option is closely linked to the input switching. This is how Windows detects whether or not Windows will switch between VR and desktop mode based on whether the presence sensor in the headset detects your head or not. This is a matter of personal preference, but I prefer manually switch using the Windows and Y keys. Note when you do select manual, it disables the second option to automatically detect the headset. Options 1 and 3 are still selectable. The third item on the menu is environment, and here 2 simple choices. Firstly, clear environmental data, and secondly, reset Microsoft Home. Note this does not reset your headset. Microsoft Home offers different colors and contrasts and is a good place to check that you've got the best display possible, that you've got your headset positioned correctly, and also to check the tracking on your controllers. And you can interact with most things in the Microsoft Home. Hitting this reset button restores everything back to its default. You would clear the environmental area if you were changing your setup from standing only to one with boundaries or vice versa. You could also use it if you're having problems with your controllers, and in particular where a controller is recorded as connected but not visible in VR. However, results can be a little erratic, so often a restart is recommended. Our fourth option on the menu is Headset Display, and it's here you'll find the most important settings. These are currently default. Under the experienced options, you'll see that it's set to best visual quality. But note, this setting is not for Microsoft Flight Simulator, but for the Microsoft VR Home. And more often than not, you'll want to change it. And this is why. Let's just bring the Microsoft Home to the foreground. And if we move our mouse down to the center bottom, you'll see a pause and play icon. Pressing pause closes Microsoft Home on the screen, but not in your VR headset. And this is what we call the mirror. And the mirror can be displayed in two different ways, flat screen or just as one eye, by clicking on this icon in the bottom right. For day-to-day use, I recommend that you disable this. It's using both CPU and GPU resources. And there's an easy way we can do this by default. Let's go back to our settings and back to Headset Display. And we can disable the on-screen home under the experience option by changing from best visual quality to optimize for performance. As soon as we did that, we can see that the screen has changed and Microsoft Home is no longer shown, nor is there an option for the mirror now available. Other changes I do is I change the level of detail down to low, the resolution to 720p. Under the headset display options, I leave the resolution set to the default HP Reverb G2, best quality setting. We will adjust this later on, but we'll use third-party applications to do this. The headset can run at both 90 and 60 Hz. I recommend 90 Hz. Doesn't run very well at 60. 90 Hz means effectively it needs 90 frames per second to run ideally. That's not achievable in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but there are software solutions that allow us to get there. We'll cover these in more detail later on. Software IPD calibration is not available on the G2 because it's manual. If you had a G1, for example, this would be adjustable, as the G1 doesn't have manual adjustment. And lastly, the sleep timeout options determine the period of time of inactivity of the headset before Windows turns it off. I have mine set to never because I don't leave it unattended for long periods of time. I'm either using it or I'm not. The ideal setting for you would be one of personal preference. As mentioned previously, I start Windows Mixed Reality before I start the sim. Once the portal's loaded up and headset connected, I minimize to the taskbar. Unless I'm changing settings, I don't need it again. If you don't minimize and you close the window, well then it will shut down and then restart when you select VR in the sim. By doing that, there's more opportunity for problems. So I leave it running and just minimized on the desktop. When you installed your headset, you installed a program called OpenXR for Windows Mixed Reality. This is an open standard within the industry, although individual manufacturers or providers have their own take on the standard. There are a number of other applications that give access to VR, some a variant on the OpenXR standard and some different. Steam, for example, uses OpenVR. Companies such as Oculus and Pimax are using a bespoke system. The Reverb G2, for example, uses Windows Mixed Reality, the Microsoft portal, into VR. Microsoft Flight Simulator is compatible with nearly all VR ports. And for Steam users, there's Windows Mixed Reality for Steam VR available, which provides compatibility with the Windows Mixed Reality platform. For those using Microsoft's Windows Mixed Reality, Microsoft provide an additional program. It's the OpenXR tools for Windows Mixed Reality, and this allows us to configure a number of settings within the application. And this is recommended and desirable as it helps improve performance considerably. The OpenXR development tool for Windows Mixed Reality is a free download available from the Microsoft Store. Go to the store, enter the title in the search bar, and then download it. Note this application is specifically designed for the Windows OpenXR. To ensure you keep your Windows apps up to date, click on the library icon in the lower left, and this will display all Windows applications loaded on your system. In the top right is Get Updates. Click on that and you should do it fairly regularly with Microsoft Flight Simulator, as it's an integral part of having a successful update. So we now have two separate VR applications loaded. OpenXR for Windows Mixed Reality, which loaded during your install, and the second is the app that we've just loaded now, OpenXR Tools for Windows Mixed Reality. And we've just checked and updated both. When we open the application, Development Tools for Windows Mixed Reality, we'll be presented with a menu across the top. The OpenXR runtime gives us all the details, as well as the version number and the runtime version. The Settings tab is the one that we're most interested in, and this is where we can change certain variables, and this can have a direct impact on our VR performance and experience. Preview runtime settings should be switched on. Under render settings, if we check the box, we're presented with a slider, and what the slider does in effect is vary the resolution that is rendered for the headset, 100% being the default native resolution. If we move the resolution to less than 100, we are effectively reducing the resolution. This means the CPU and GPU are not working as hard and can improve performance, but at the expense potentially of visual fidelity. If we change the slider to more than 100%, well, we're now doing exactly the reverse. We're increasing the resolution and making the CPU and GPU work much harder. This will have a negative impact on performance. If you leave the box unchecked, it will be 100% by default. In terms of preferred settings, it depends on your CPU and GPU. Typically, for lower-end systems, it would be between 60 and 70%, 70 to 85 for mid-range systems, and 85 to 100% for higher-end systems and the RTX graphic card range. Of course, different systems have different performance levels, so I am generalizing. So we're able to use the most up-to-date preview available for the OpenXR runtime by selecting our preview to on. We can also adjust the resolution that's being projected into the headset to help us scale our performance to acceptable levels. But there's a third and important setting available in this app, and that's motion reprojection. And this has three settings: disabled, automatic, or always on. When you're first testing your system, I strongly recommend that you have this disabled. Achieve an acceptable performance using your in-sim VR graphics setting with adjustments to the custom render scale. Once you have an acceptable level of performance, then it could be time to revisit motion reprojection. Let's first of all understand what motion reprojection is. Whilst it can vary from headset to headset, generally speaking, VR headsets need 90 frames per second to give an ultimate smooth performance. This is the case with the HP Reverb G2 running at 90 Hz. But depending on the application, and particularly so in flight simulation, headsets are rarely capable of achieving that 90 frames per second. The result is stuttering and tearing and a very jerky experience in the headset. Motion reprojection attempts to overcome that by inserting additional transitional frame to effectively make up the shortfall, and can fill in the gaps, as it were, as low as an actual FPS of 22.5 frames per second. Disabled obviously means it's turned off. Automatic means the system will attempt to make up the shortfall as and when necessary, and always on, again, I think is self-explanatory. Motion reprojection, however, does come with some penalties, and that's normally some graphical artifacting, and you may well see this on the leading edge of wings, through the propeller and so on. The main benefit, of course, is that if your system is not quite up to running Microsoft Flight Simulator, by having motion reprojection on, this could make the difference between having a flyable sim and an unflyable sim. If your system is struggling, it can allow you to get a much smoother performance and perhaps turn up those settings for a better overall experience. Note that if you make any changes to this application, you need to restart VR for them to take effect. However, you do not need this application open all the time when you're running your VR application. Settings will automatically feed into Windows Mixed Reality. Let's now turn to some system and graphics settings. First of all, graphics. If you use the NVIDIA GeForce Experience, as I do, make sure that you click on the settings icon, then games and apps, and make sure the optimal playable settings is not checked, as this will constantly reset your settings in Sim. In 95% of cases, you're always better off using the latest graphics driver, and rather than do the express install, I recommend you do the custom installation. It's cleaner and neater this way. Click yes when the prompt comes up. We'll allow this device to make changes. Then at the bottom of the window, click Perform a Clean Install and then Install. If you're using an NVIDIA graphics card, open up the NVIDIA control panel. And once open, choose Manage 3D Settings. There will be two tabs, Global and Program. Select the Program settings. And here you can customize NVIDIA graphics settings for particular application. In this case, I've chosen Microsoft Flight Simulator. You can add applications by selecting Add. We can now customize graphics settings for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Scroll down, we're looking for Power Management Mode. Default is Normal, and select Prefer Maximum Performance. Once that's done, scroll down a little bit further for Texture Filtering Quality. It's set to Quality, change it to High Performance. If you're using a 3080 Ti or higher, you may want to leave this at Quality. Experiment with both. The other change you can make, and it's optional, is to the virtual reality pre-rendered frame. Default is 1, you can change it to 2. I've found it doesn't really make a significant difference. That's all the changes that we need. Click Apply, and we're done. Open up the search from your taskbar and type in Game Mode. The app will appear, click on that, and you'll be presented with this screen. You can select to have game mode either on or off. Game mode is designed to prioritize the PC when it's playing games. However, tests I've done post Sim Update 9 means whether you have it on or off makes little difference to the frames per second in Microsoft Flight Simulator. I currently normally have mine on. On the top right, you will see Related Settings, Graphic Settings. Select that. This takes us to the option to enable or disable Hardware Accelerated GPU Scheduling, or HAGS for short. Once again, post Sim Update 9 I've done further tests, and I highly recommend that HAGS is switched off. HAGS is supposed to improve performance, but in Microsoft Flight Simulator the reverse is true. Keep Hardware Accelerated GPU Scheduling off. There is another recommended download that can substantially help you with your performance in VR in Microsoft Flight Simulator. It is somewhat confusingly called OpenXR Toolkit, not to be confused with the OpenXR development tools for Windows Mixed Reality that we just covered. However, I don't recommend that you download this application and use it when initially establishing your settings. There are many more options in this application, and this will be the subject of my next video, and we'll cover the options available in some detail. So the process I'm recommending is using the OpenXR Development Toolkit for Windows Mixed Reality in conjunction with your Microsoft Flight Simulator VR graphics settings to establish a good performance. Once you've achieved that, then it'll be time to look at the OpenXR Toolkit. So on that note, it's time now for us to have a look and understand what is available and what do the various settings do in Microsoft Flight Simulator. A little bit later on in the video, I'll be showing you suggested settings to start depending on your system, low, medium or high. But first, let's jump into Sim and understand the settings and the potential impact they can have on our performance. From the main menu, we choose Options and then General Options. Before having a look at the graphic options, let's first of all have a look at a number of other settings. First, under Data. To ensure your tests are accurate, it is recommended that you've got Bing World Graphics on, as well as Photogrammetry and Live Weather. Having the world graphics and photogrammetry on will provide maximum stress for your system and allow you to accurately ascertain the correct settings. Then choosing the last item on the left-hand menu, VR Mode. And as highlighted in my previous video, VR Essentials Cockpit Interaction, there are 3 functions I strongly recommend you map to a peripheral. Activate or deactivate VR mode, the top toolbar activate and deactivate in VR, and lastly camera reset will sit you back in the pilot seat. Finding keys or combination of keys whilst you've got the VR headset on will be very difficult. Now to the top item in our menu, graphics. Click on that to open up. We'll see the PC settings and then click on one of the arrows to reveal the VR graphic settings. Don't pay too much attention to what my settings are, we're more interested in what the individual settings do. And the first one right at the top is render scaling. And this can either increase or decrease your resolution and carries out very much the same function as we saw in the developer's OpenXR Toolkit for Windows Mixed Reality. It's recommended that you change the resolution in the OpenXR Development Toolkit app and not here. Leave this set at 100. And the reason for this is simple. It's less taxing on the system to do it at the OpenXR stage rather than the in-sim render. Render scaling is a big hitter and can have a direct and immediate impact on your VR performance. Anti-aliasing is what effectively smooths out curves and gets rid of those jagged edges. There are a number of options available here. I recommend TAA. Whilst it's the heaviest on the system, it's by far the best. AA settings do tend to give a softer feel to images overall. Terrain level of detail affects the quality of the terrain being drawn, in effect the amount of data being used, and again can have quite an impact on performance. One to watch. Off-screen terrain pre-caching is the amount of data it will preload. In effect, this is the data the system thinks it's going to need to draw next. Low represents a nominal amount of pre-caching and ultra the maximum. The setting you use should be determined by your system and how much memory you've got as well as your bandwidth, as some of the data it's using will be streamed unless you're offline. 8 GB of memory should be low to medium, 16 should be medium to high, 32 or more should be high or ultra. Again, this is just indicative because what CPU you have has an impact on this as well. Terrain vector data is basically the tiling and how well the graphic tiles fit together, and this mainly affects things such as oceans, lakes, rivers and roads and so on. Buildings, trees, grasses and bushes all have various settings from low to ultra. And the easiest way to interpret the difference between the various settings is draw distance. At a low setting it'll be drawing in about 4 kilometers around you data. At ultra, 20 kilometers or more depending on the data available. If you're mainly an airline pilot, well, the detail close to the ground's not important, and this could be set to low or medium. If you're doing low and slow VFR, well then you may want to turn these up. They're worth experimenting with as they do have quite an impact on performance and frame rates. Object level of detail does what it says on the tin, but also note that this affects the density as well. This would have perhaps the biggest impact when flying over something like New York or London, and can sometimes have a negative impact on performance at larger airports, particularly third-party ones. Volumetric clouds are true 3D clouds, as opposed to just sprites being drawn in the sky. This is certainly one of the settings to experiment with, as it can have a dramatic impact on frames per second. Texture resolution lets you vary the resolution for the ground and other textures within the sim. Anisotropic filtering is very much GPU heavy, so your ideal setting will depend to some degree on what GPU you have. In essence, it provides greater clarity at those items in the distance, and particularly those things at oblique angles. Texture supersampling is again fairly GPU heavy. It helps smooth out the jagged edges and will use higher resolution images and then downscale them to fit the headset, improving overall image quality. Texture synthesis is the detail of the individual tiles that are drawn across the terrain and other surfaces, and to some degree can affect the repeat pattern. Water wave affects the resolution of the water and the animations associated with that. Shadow maps affect the quality of the shadows cast by 3D objects. The detail and resolution of terrain shadows can be determined by the various settings, higher being better. and contact shadows is very much the same. As I understand it, and I stand to be corrected, contact shadows is where two surfaces meet and a shadow is cast. Windshield effects are items such as ice and rain, and the visual quality that is drawn. As with all these settings, higher being better, and caution with some of these settings as they can have quite an impact. And now for another big hitter, ambient occlusion. What ambient occlusion is really the shading and rendering of objects in relation to light. Higher setting will give you a better perception of 3D shapes, but it's a big hit on the system and one to be conscious of. Start low and work your way up. Cube map reflections, as I understand it, is the way that shadows are drawn on 3D surfaces. Ray march reflections is a technique used for showing reflections on surfaces such as water. Ray march reflections may be the poor man's ray tracing, so be conscious it does have an impact on performance. Again, start low and work your way up. Light shafts are the degree and intensity of light, for example, coming through the clouds. Bloom is like the shine or light reflection of a camera lens. And lastly, the glass cockpit refresh rate. This affects how quickly your instruments update, such as your altimeter, speed gauge and so on. Again, experiment here as it does have an impact on frame rates. You do need to test and experiment with various settings to achieve optimum results for your VR headset. My system is a 10900K and a 3090 RTX graphics card, and you've been able to see my settings. When experimenting, these are the items you need to pay particular attention to overall, as they tend to have the bigger impact. Just make a note of these when you're doing your tests, and perhaps these are some of the first ones to adjust up or down. I have to caveat everything I've said that they are based on my personal experience. I'm not a graphics specialist. I'm going to classify this even further by assuming that your graphics card has a minimum of 8 GB memory and that your computer has at least 16 GB of RAM. One of the problems with a video such as this giving multiple settings is you're still not sure where to start. So to provide some measure of assistance, I have provided 3 suggested starting points depending on your system, be it low, medium or high. The scope of the systems detailed above are in no way exhaustive, and I acknowledge there's plenty of gaps, but at least it does give you some form of indication. So based on my classification, here are the 3 suggested starting points for Microsoft Flight Simulator settings, starting off with low, then medium and high. If you find at these settings that you're struggling in VR with micro pauses, stutters and tearing, then you need to have a look at these settings and turn a few of them down, and paying particular attention to some of the big hitters other than render scaling, I would suggest. I will comment again that this is purely my recommendation. I'm pretty sure I'll have somebody comment they've got a ZX Spectrum with no graphics card and getting 90 frames per second, but I had to choose some starting point somewhere, in the hope that it will assist people to get going. If you find that your VR experience is smooth, then I would suggest that you go in and change one setting at a time, move it up, based on those factors that are important to you, and of course the type of flying that you're doing. Contact shadows and water waves, for example, are not likely to be important if you're an airline pilot, but the cockpit refresh rate, well, that'll be very important to you, so you should pay attention to that aspect, as an example. And how do we measure a good performance? Well, it's very much subjective rather than objective. You want a smooth flying experience? Don't worry too much about a frame rate counter. It's about what feels comfortable for you. And do your tests in an area that you regularly fly in, and preferably one that has a combination of buildings, water, reflections and so on. So what is the sequence I recommend for doing the tests? To start off with, set your render scale in the OpenXR Toolkit for Windows Mixed Reality to 70 or 80%. Then in Sim, experiment with the appropriate level of settings to see how good or bad the VR experience is. It's then a matter of experimentation between those factors that are important to you in Sim and the level of graphics fidelity that you require. and you need to acknowledge there will be some compromises on the way. What I try and achieve is a set and forget setting. That is to say, I pick settings that I can fly fairly smoothly in built-up areas as well as bush flights. I don't want to continually be going back and tweaking settings. My system settings are shown above for your info and in relation to the settings that I've used. When determining your settings, one observation to bear in mind: the difference between high and ultra is nominal, especially in a VR headset unless you're lucky enough to have a Varjo Aero. Chances are your headset's not able to take advantage of ultra settings because of the headset resolution, the exception being clouds and those settings relating to draw distance. My final piece of advice is don't get hung up on the frame rate, especially if you're using the in-sim frame counter via the development mode. These are not designed to measure frame rate in VR accurately. A good performance is when it's smooth and when you're happy. Well, we certainly covered a lot of ground today. Just a reminder, there are timestamps in the notes below, so if you want to have quick reference to a particular topic in the future, you can do so. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more like this. A link to my full VR Essentials playlist is also in the descriptions below. Take care, look after yourselves, see you again soon, and bye for now. Oh my God, that was a long one. I need a beer.